Okay, so as a reminder or review from yesterday, we're talking about the respiratory system. We're going to finish that up today and begin a little bit into the circulatory system. We talked about how oxygen enters in your body via the nasal cavity, travels through, we'll just go back, let me pull up those slides. We'll review the terms and the locations from, again, this is from the page in your textbook, or at the beginning of that chapter. So just a quick review. Let me make this as big as I can. It'll make it a little warped, but that's okay. It'll help us see. So oxygen is out here in the air. You breathe in, oxygen happens. You capture some of the oxygen that's in the air around you. And remember, just as a side note too, a little bit of information regarding percentages, most of the air in our atmosphere that surrounds us is not oxygen, it's actually nitrogen. And so when you breathe in, you're breathing in a whole lot of nitrogen, oxygen, which is the next highest percentage of gases, and then a whole bunch of other stuff, including carbon dioxide, because carbon dioxide is also in our atmosphere in the air that surrounds us. So we're breathing in a whole lot of stuff. Your nose is not, or your nasal cavity is not that discerning. You're just inhaling the air. It just happens that the oxygen is what we care about because that's what allows us to continue our biological processes. All the other stuff, that nitrogen, remember, we need nitrogen, but we don't get nitrogen from the air that we breathe in usable form for our bodies. We actually, remember, if you think way back, we have to eat plants in order to get the nitrogen our body needs to do cellular functions. But the oxygen that we breathe in, along with all the other things that we don't need, but that are there, the oxygen comes in nasal cavities, passes through the pharynx, by the epiglottis, and since it's air and not food, we travel into the, past the larynx, into our trachea, which if you remember, that's the windpipe. And then we can go to either side, this branches off, the bronchi, and go to either lung. And at that point, we come and we branch off into the bronchioles, which sends the oxygen into the alveoli, which are surrounded by capillaries. And that's the bridge between the respiratory system and the circulatory system, because we have all that oxygen, it's being processed and traveling in the right direction, and then we have to get it to the rest of our body. If the oxygen just stays in the lungs, it does us no good. Now let's continue and kind of finish up our discussion here with the respiratory system. How do we even get oxygen near us? How do we get it close enough? And then why is it able to move in from the surroundings into our nasal passages? Well, our nasal cavity, because of diffusion. Diffusion, if you remember, is when a molecules travel from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration. So if you're in the air that's surrounding you right now, in your nasal cavity, it comes in and then it goes down. So at any given moment, there's more oxygen outside than inside. So as you breathe in, the oxygen diffuses to where there's less. That just happens to be sometimes into your nasal cavity. Okay. Then at some point, in order to do this any good, remember, it goes through that whole passage that we just talked about into the lungs, and then into the extensions from the lungs, the alveoli, which are surrounded by the capillaries. At some point, at that transition point, the oxygen has to bind to hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is a protein specifically designed to carry oxygen on our red blood cells. So a red blood cell, which technically isn't a cell at all, we will get to that as we discuss more about the circulatory system, but we call them red blood cells. They're not really red blood cells. Again, we'll talk about why. But on that red blood cell is hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is what allows oxygen to bind to those red blood cells. And it's the red blood cells that are the oxygen transporters for your body. So so hemoglobin's hanging out on that red blood cell. Oxygen, via diffusion, binds to it, and then it's referred to as oxyhemoglobin, because now that hemoglobin, the protein, has oxygen attached to it. And so the shape shifts just a little bit to become oxyhemoglobin. So then those red blood cells carry the oxyhemoglobin through the capillaries and then out into your larger blood vessels where it needs to go. So again, diffusion is at work. And something else to think about, while you know that your body needs oxygen, all those cells need to do cellular respiration in order to give us enough energy in order to be able to do our other bodily functions. Our waste product, among others, is carbon dioxide. Well, the good news is that our red blood cells are useful in that regard too, because hemoglobin can also carry carbon dioxide. And we'll talk about that in the coming days as we get to the circulatory system. But the oxygen once the oxygen has been offloaded from the hemoglobin via diffusion, carbon dioxide is able to catch a ride on the hemoglobin, come back the opposite direction, and then be exhaled as it passes back into the lungs. Again, we'll get there, but it's all a circular path through the body and back up, from the lungs down, and then from down back up to the lungs, so that you can exhale that carbon dioxide out. So as an overview, oxygen comes into the respiratory system all the way from your nasal cavity into your lungs. Lungs have branches, those branches have alveoli, those alveoli are surrounded by capillaries, and we get oxygen into the bloodstream. Now, in order for it to be able to fully do its work, it has to have some oomph behind it. So that's when it goes to the heart. The heart pumps the blood travels to the blood vessels, into cells and into tissues, and cellular respiration is allowed to progress because we have enough oxygen, and so we take the glucose and we break it apart and we make our ATP. And the 3 stages of respiration. Inhaling air, that's external, from the outside. You inhale it in, then you have internal respiration, which means what your red blood cells are doing and transporting the oxygen from your lungs via the heart through the rest of your body. And then once it hits the oxygen, you still have to, you take it in, you need it. It has to get to the rest of your body or it's pointless. Your heart does that job, pushes that oxygen out away from the heart that now has been gone through the lungs, into the heart, oxygenated, heart pushes it out. And it goes through all parts of your body because all of your body cells need to be able to do cellular respiration. And that's the important function. That's the whole reason we need oxygen, is so that we can perform cellular respiration in order to produce ATP. Okay? The last little bit on this for now is just think about the idea of breathing and what controls it. Well, you don't tell yourself to breathe, just like you don't tell yourself to, for your heart to beat. Okay, you don't tell your body to do certain functions. It just is part of the nervous system, and the nervous system in your brain is controlling your breathing cycles. All right, and that's a good thing. You don't want to, it's like when you're sleeping, it would be impossible to tell your body to do inhalation or your body to do exhalation, because even if you do inhalation and you don't do exhalation, you're going to suffocate because you're going to have too much carbon dioxide. So it's a good thing that that's not, that it is an involuntary process. You don't have to think about breathing. Likewise, you don't have to think about your heart beating. Your body just does it. And it's controlled by your brain, by your nervous system. Now, there are a couple things to keep in mind that when you're breathing, you know that sometimes your respiratory rate changes. Sometimes you're much calmer. Sometimes you're breathing heavier. And usually a heavier breath is accompanied by a faster heart rate. Now, think of the times and think of the activities that causes you to have to breathe heavier and for your heart to beat faster. What happens that typically causes that uptick in heartbeat and respiration level? Exercise would be one. You're running, you're doing whatever, playing sports, basketball, football, soccer, you're out running around. It's a combination. Your heart rate is faster, so it's pumping more blood, partly because your body is working harder, the cells need more oxygen. So if the cells need more oxygen, you're also going to have to breathe more frequently. So your respiration rate increases as your heart rate increases. So you're breathing, taking in more oxygen, your heart is being faster to pump that oxygen to the other parts of your body. And sometimes, as we've talked about, your heart rate and your respiration rate cannot keep up with your body's needs. And that's when cellular respiration kind of shuts off and you resort to anaerobic respiration, meaning respiration without oxygen. And that in people, in mammals and humans and other animals is, if you can remember, lactic acid fermentation, because your breathing rate and your heart rate cannot keep up with what certain parts of your body are needing in that moment. So if you're lifting weights and you're doing a different exercise, or you up your weight on something, you're probably going to be sore. And that's because you're doing something new. Those muscles aren't used to it. They've had to work harder and they didn't have enough oxygen to do that particular, for your muscle cells to be able to keep doing that activity and do cellular respiration. So your muscle cells resorted to anaerobic respiration. Those muscles got tired. You got lactic acid buildup because of the anaerobic respiration. Lactic acid is a byproduct of that. And so you are sore for a few days. But if you keep doing the exercise, you keep doing it, or you run further, or you, a lot of times it also happens in sports transitions. So I remember when I was playing basketball, first couple of days, really sore after the first, coming back after break from basketball. But then I'd be in where I grew up, we played girls basketball in the fall. It was a fall sport. And so we would get back in shape after a bit of a summer off, and we'd be tired and sore those first few days of practice. Then we'd get into our groove and we weren't sore anymore. Then, so that would be, from August until December. And then December would roll around and we'd start volleyball. And volleyball is you'd think it wouldn't be that much of a difference, but it always was. And every season, that transition period between basketball and volleyball, I would spend a week after volleyball practice feeling drained, and then waking up the next morning and feeling really sore because I was using muscles in a different way. They were fatigued because I wasn't able to get them enough oxygen because those parts of my body were tired. So you guys experience this too. Anytime you switch activities or you start to do something you haven't done in a long time, you get sore. And that's because you just can't keep up with your oxygen needs. And it's a temporary problem. The more you do it, the more used to it your body gets. And then a few days, you're no longer getting sore. Another time, just to something else to think about, when you might not feel like you have enough oxygen is when you have an elevation change. So we basically here in Northern Virginia are close enough to sea level where that's just what we're used to. So when you go, you don't notice a difference when you go to the beach, for example, in your breathing rate. But if you were to go out to, and probably the mountains on the East Coast, the elevation probably wouldn't be great enough to make a difference. But when, if you went out west to the Rockies and you decided to, go vacation, go skiing, you would probably notice that your breathing rate changes. And it may take you a few days, to get used to the change in elevation. And the reason that happens is a shift in atmospheric pressure. The higher in elevation you climb, the lower the atmospheric pressure, and that changes the diffusion of the gas molecules. And it affects how oxygen is able to be exchanged, both into your body, but then within those capillaries at the alveoli. It changes the diffusion rate. And so you probably will feel a little more fatigued in that first day or two when you change extreme elevations. And then your body gets used to it, just kind of like with exercising a new muscle. And then life goes on and you don't notice it anymore. All right. we'll stop there today. That's the end of our respiratory alone situation, as much as that's the end of our discussion on respiratory system with as limited circulatory system discussion that we can have. Tomorrow, we will start talking about the circulatory system, and we'll start talking about our blood vessels and start talking about the main engine behind the circulatory system, which is our heart. All right, I will see you guys soon. Have a great day.